So over this period of 24 hours, our tradition challenges us to imagine our own deaths, to bare our souls before our God. It's quite a challenge to the imagination, or it can be. So I'd like to share with you an experience I had this summer in which I did imagine my own death. My soul was bared, and I totally forgot my God. It was when my husband David and I were on a backpacking trip. We were with an old friend, Aryeh. We were in the Trinity Alps, just west of Mount Shasta. And the first day of our trip was a tough slog. Mile after mile had been decimated by fires a few years back. The heartbreak of walking among the tree stumps in that gray, desolate land was concretized by the miserable heat of the sun and no trees to shade us. But we camped in a basin that had escaped the fires and was still pristine. A wall of granite behind our campsite changed colors as the sun moved across the sky from silver to white to gold, while the lake on the basin floor shifted from gray to blue to black. Now, our friend Aryeh is a real mountaineer. He knows the Trinity Alps like the backs of his hands, and he can do things on rocks I would never attempt. So for the second day of our trip, we planned to climb together out of the basin. The map showed that the trail ended at the top of the ridge, and Aryeh would leave us there and go exploring off trail on the other side. But less than 100 feet from our campsite, a massive snowfield covered the trail. It was unseasonal for July, a result of the crazy precipitation last winter. No problem, Aryeh led us confidently off trail, away from the snow. I had no trouble following him. I was confident that David and I could manage the return hike on our own if we just retraced our steps. You know where this is going. The view at the top was spectacular, and then Aryeh was gone. And within 5 minutes, David led us too steeply downhill, and we were no longer on the original path. I was having trouble retaining my foothold on a very slippery slope. Soon I was down on my tuchus, imagining myself tumbling down that mountain, thinking about the helicopter that would come to retrieve my mangled body, thinking about how my children would receive the news that they had lost their mother. I yelled at David, "Why did you take us away from Aryeh's path?" "Let's go down to the snowfield," David suggested. "It's easier to dig your heel into snow than dirt." So I half slid, half crawled down to the snow. But when we got there, we found it was about 4 feet thick with a gap underneath big enough for a person to slip right into. And as I was trying to hoist myself up, I dropped one of my hiking poles and it disappeared under the ice field. Panic surged up inside me and I yelled at my husband again. So we scrambled away from the snow, trying to get back to the path Aryeh had taken. And as I was scooting and sliding my way down on that slippery dirt, I had an actual panic attack. I began hyperventilating. That never happened to me before, and please God, I never want it to happen again. It is a horrible experience. I know some of you have experienced that. Somehow David knew what to do. He reminded me to breathe, and slowly, slowly, we made it down that ridge. Never once did I stop to pray. The Hebrew language has 2 words for faith. The more common word, emunah, comes from the same root as amen. Other words in that family are ne'eman, loyal or steadfast, and omen, a caregiver or a nanny. Now, in its original connotation, emunah referred to relationship rather than ideas or beliefs. So to say I have emunah, faith in God, is very much like saying I have faith in my husband. And apparently that day on the ridge, I was lacking in both. The other word for faith, less common, but I think very evocative, is bitachon. Other words that share that same root are betach, which means of course or for sure. Batuach, certain. Haftacha, promise. The word for seatbelt, chagurat betichut. A person who has bitachon has a sense of security as they move through life, kind of like a seatbelt. Their faith is a trust that whatever life throws at them, they're going to be okay. Here's what Alan Morinus, a modern master of the Jewish ethical tradition called Musar, says about bitachon in his book, Everyday Holiness. The soul yearns to trust. No one wants to live with anxiety and worry. When I'm in the place where trust runs strong, life is manageable. And when trust has slipped away, life is a difficult, daunting struggle. I believe that Americans are facing a crisis of trust. Not just a crisis of emunah and bitachon, faith and trust in God, but faith and trust of every kind. Trust in our core relationships, trust in our shared institutions, trust in our leaders, trust in our authorities and experts. All of it feels constantly on the line. At the beginning of this year, The Atlantic published an article by Derek Thompson in which he described what he calls America's trust gap. This is what he said. Every form of institutional trust is in free fall. In a country where people don't trust the government to be honest, or businesses to be ethical, or members of the opposite party to respect the rule of law, it is hard to build anything quickly and effectively, or for that matter, anything that lasts. He cites a research article published in The Lancet, a well-respected medical journal, that compared rates of COVID infection across 177 countries during the height of the pandemic. And one of the best predictors for minimized infection was the public's level of trust in their government. Here's how the authors of that medical paper describe the effect of trust. Trust is a shared resource that enables networks of people to do collectively what individual actors cannot. Imagine a world without trust. You couldn't drive to work because you couldn't trust the other drivers on the road would obey the traffic laws. You couldn't take public transportation because you couldn't trust that the bus would arrive. If you got sick, there'd be no point in going to the doctor because you couldn't trust their expertise. And if you were fed up with the whole situation, you couldn't talk to anyone about it because you couldn't trust they won't use your words against you. It's a nightmare vision, one that in fact echoes from many other times and places. Operating in a world without trust is like walking on a steep ridge with the ground slipping under your feet. And it's not just Americans that are suffering from a lack of trust right now. Internationally, trust levels have declined, and with it, our ability to cooperate in the face of massive problems. The UN Secretary General has raised concern about what he calls a global trust deficit. The Edelman Trust Barometer, which is an annual study of global levels of trust, has for several years been reporting alarmingly deep mistrust of both governments and media. And I don't think it's just our trust in institutions that is suffering. I have the sense that our ability to trust one another on a personal level has also taken a hit. And that might be the most damaging of all. It hurts so bad to feel that others don't trust you. It hurts even worse to feel that there is no one you can really trust. Amidst this painful deficit of human trust, does bitachon matter? Trust in God? It certainly doesn't have to. One can certainly nurture a deep spirit of collaboration without ever turning to God. But consider this piece of my story of panic on the ridge. The very next day, David and I took a hike in the opposite direction. And in a few places, the trail was blocked by massive trees that had been felled by the fires. And the only way around was to scramble up a very steep slope. But the trail was never more than a few feet below us. And I knew that if I slipped, the trail would break my fall. And when I was less afraid, I was able to walk across upright, nervous, but totally calm. Bitachon can be like an imaginary trail under our slope. When we stare into the chasm of frightening possibilities, bitachon is a trust that if we slip, we will not be in free fall. At the end of our drop, we may be badly hurt, but there will be a new path for us to follow. Bitachon is not a theology or a philosophy. It's a state of mind. It means closing the tap a little on fear and resistance and anger and opening the tap of love and acceptance and trust. Rabbi Ezra spoke to us on Rosh Hashanah about Martin Buber's conception of I and thou, shifting our interactions away from treating others as it and towards thou changes everything. For Buber, bitachon was the ultimate source of every I-thou interaction. In that moment when we turn to another with total openness to see and accept them as they are, without trying to get something from them and also without trying to change them, in that moment, we release our own fortresses of defense. A true I-thou interaction demands that we let go of preconceptions, of our own needs, and most of all, of our inclination to judge and of our fear of being judged. For Buber, a true I and thou interaction is the divinity in me seeing the divinity in you. Daryl Stickel is a world expert on trust. And in his book, Building Trust, he provides a more practical definition. Here's his definition. Trust is our willingness to make ourselves vulnerable to another party when we can't completely predict how that party will act. He then breaks that definition down into three component parts: vulnerability, uncertainty, and choice. If we have no vulnerability, we have nothing to worry about, and there's no need to trust. If we have complete certainty of the outcome of an encounter, trust is also irrelevant. And if we have no choice in the matter, well, coercion's not the same thing as trust. So again, trust is the willingness, choice, to make ourselves vulnerable to another party when we can't completely predict how that party will act. Vulnerability, uncertainty, and choice. Now, Stickel is interested in teaching his readers and his clients how to build other people's trust in them. Writers are interested in that because, after all, we don't want everyone to trust us. And his model for building trust is based on lowering the other person's sense of vulnerability and uncertainty. It's a good thing to work on, understanding how to build other people's trust. But that's not what I'm talking about tonight. Except maybe to say this, that trust is a two-way street. And if the other person feels you are open and trusting with them, they are more likely to give you their trust. But what I'm really asking us to focus on tonight is how we can help ourselves walk through the world with feeling less fear and less mistrust. If, as Stickel says, our ability to trust is tied to our sense of vulnerability, it's no surprise that global trust is declined. Just open your web browser and type the word news. Or don't open your web browser. We've all smelled the smokes of the fires that have been devastating our beautiful land. We all saw those torrential floods that wiped out roads and houses and left unseasonable snowfields in those mountains. We all lived through the effects of a global pandemic too. Of course we're feeling vulnerable. Of course it's hard to trust. But we Jews are no strangers to vulnerability. We don't have to look far back to remember what it was like to live under constant threat of exile or massacre. For centuries, Jews were the football of Europe, tossed from one feudal region to the next. And with each violent upheaval, our ancestors' bitachon carried them through to begin again in a new place. Now, I don't want to be misunderstood here. Bitachon did not turn our ancestors into gullible fools, and I'm not advocating blind faith. If a person is not trustworthy, maintain your boundaries. And if a trail is not safe, don't take it unless you absolutely have to. Bitachon allows you to walk with confidence along the path you must take and to be more fully open to the people you should trust. Here's the language of Mesilat Yesharim, a very influential book of Musar from the 18th century. Someone who does not want to conduct himself in an intelligent manner and exposes himself to dangers, this is not bitachon, this is foolishness. Bitachon is not an empty optimism that the worst will never happen. It does not mean closing our eyes and pretending we have nothing to fear and no responsibilities. It is a trust that no matter how bad things get, we will find a new light and a new way forward. At the deepest level of bitachon, even death does not matter, for God's light awaits us after that final fall. Trust is also tied to uncertainty. To increase trust, Stickel suggests methods of reducing uncertainty. Our ancestors took a different approach. Accept uncertainty. Work towards embracing the truth that our lives can change in a moment. Nowhere is this as strongly stated as in the holiday liturgy. Each person's origin is dust. Each person will return to the earth having spent life seeking sustenance. Scripture compares human beings to a broken shard, a withering grass, a shriveled flower, a passing shadow. The words of the daily prayers all year long are a lot less intense, but the message is there too. Nothing in this world is permanent. And when we have internalized that truth, when we have accepted our own mortality, it becomes much easier to trust because nothing in this world warrants holding on quite so tight. The third factor Stickel identified is choice. Trust is a choice. There are many times when it's wise to choose to withhold trust. What about situations where trust is safe and yet difficult? If I am fully empowered to walk away, why should I choose to make myself vulnerable? Many people have been sharing with me lately that their willingness to trust others has declined. One dear friend told me, when I was young, I would ask friends for help all the time. I remember once I missed the train to the airport. It was 6 a.m. and my then boyfriend was out of town, but I called his apartment to see if any of his roommates were awake and could drive me. One of them did. Well, the people you can call at 6 a.m. for a ride, those are relationships of deep, abiding trust. But my friend went on. I would never do that now. I would call a Lyft. And really, so would I. I would call a friend to take me to the airport if I had the option of paying someone to do it. And yet, the less we rely on one another, the less we are there for each other, the more lonely and isolated we become. Most of us become used to a very high level of control in our lives. Even if you can't afford to call a Lyft at a moment's notice, just to be able to walk into a supermarket and select from any of 10 types of bread prepared by an anonymous baker whom you will never meet, to be able to sit in front of a computer and have access to a depth and breadth of information that our ancestors could only have dreamed of, to be able to pick up a phone and speak to a person miles away. These are all things to celebrate. Our lives have become so much easier and so much longer than anything our ancestors could have dreamed of, and it has allowed us to accomplish so much. And at the same time, our Torah understood that the more independent we are, the harder it becomes to let go and trust in that which is beyond our control. Why couldn't I feel bitachon on the ridge that day? Because I was trying too hard to be in control. My muscles were too tense. I was pushing my heels too hard into the ground. If I could have relaxed, if I had used my breath for prayer instead of hyperventilating, I would have made it easily down. In the words of the prophet Jeremiah, blessed is the man who trusts in Adonai. Adonai becomes his confidence. There is sadly a PS to this sermon. As I was making final revisions on Tuesday afternoon, the air quality in the Bay Area was transitioning from orange to red to deep maroon. I didn't know it till I closed my laptop and stepped outside. Immediately, I whipped out my cell phone and pulled up purple air, needing to confirm with numbers that I could trust my own nose. And then I went to the CAL FIRE website, wanting to know where the fires are this time. My heart caught in my throat. Shasta Trinity National Forest, where David, Ari, and I had hiked this past July. I ran to find David. I told him what I had just learned, and I wept. Not again. Not again. That land has suffered too much already. I felt shame. I am not innocent in this. I felt despair. This is so much beyond any one of us. And then, having just been writing about it 3 hours earlier, I remembered to reach for bitachon, trust. We need trust to work together, precisely because this problem is so much bigger than any one of us. It is only when we relinquish some of our independence, when we are ready to grasp hands metaphorically and sometimes literally, and trust in one another, and trust in our ability to work together for change, that together we will be able to heal our world. Came here at so maybe the Chatima Tova.